I recently scanned every single physical book on my TBR to put it into my Notion reading tracker to force myself to acknowledge how many unread books I have and that I have a problem that I need to work on. And I discovered that I had 194 books on my physical TBR, that based on my current reading speed, if I were to read nothing but the physical books I already own, it would take me about a year and a half to finish them all. And I know myself, and I know that I don't do well on a complete book buying ban, which means I am going to keep bringing books into my collection, even if at a slower pace. So something has to be done. I have to prioritize reading the books I already own, especially because as I went through and scanned all of them, I was reminded how excited I was to read all these books and the reasons why I bought them in the first place. And for some reason, as soon as I put them back on my shelf, it's like they're wiped from my mind. I no longer have any urge to read them. It's like they're not even there. It is very strange. So I need to make myself read them. And I've decided the best way for me to tackle this personally is through a reading challenge that I'm going to document for all of you, because it really is my best motivator, having other people to hold me accountable if I fall off. So feel free to help me out if I start to fall off the wagon, but this is my plan. This is my introduction video. This is the first reading vlog in this series, and it is going to be structured in a read it or unhaul it sort of format. This is largely inspired by Emily Fox. I love her channel. Check her out if you haven't watched her videos. She's a fellow Canadian cat mom, has great taste in books. Anyways, I have really enjoyed watching her series, and I decided to do something similar. Here are the basic rules. Once a week, I'm going to sit down and randomly select a book from my TBR bookshelf. I'll document this random book selection every single week and post a reel, TikTok, so you can follow along in closer to real time as I make my selections. Then I have a week to try to read that book. And there are 3 eventualities that I can foresee. The first is that I'm able to finish the book in that week, in which case I will come back the next week, and before I select my next pick, I'll review the last one. The second possibility is that I'm really having a bad time with the book I pick. I realize that it no longer appeals to me as much as it did when I first bought it, or maybe it just isn't what I expected, and I really want to DNF. In which case, that's what I'll do. I'll DNF it and I'll unhaul it. For me, unhauling it means I will put it in my little free library in my front yard so that someone else in my neighborhood can enjoy it, even if I don't. I get it out of my space and remove it from the tally. In that case, again, the next week before I select my next book, I'll give you a little bit of an update as to why I ended up DNFing. Try to give you a bit of an idea of whether it would work for you or not, as much as I can based on however much I got through, so that it's hopefully still useful for you as a viewer. The third eventuality I can see is that I am enjoying the book and I know I want to read it, but for whatever reason, whether it's the fact that it is a long enough book or a dense enough book that I know I'll need more than a week to finish it, or maybe it's a book that I know I'm really going to want to read, but it's just not the right time, especially because I am actively in the process of pretty intense grief right now. There are some things that I just know I can't read at the moment. So I want a little bit of an out for myself, a self-compassion clause, if you will, that whether I feel like I need a little bit more time than a week to finish it and to really enjoy the book as I feel it's meant to be enjoyed and really allow myself to process it, or I know that I need to take a little bit of time or wait a few weeks or a few months before I can come back and read it when I'm in a better headspace. I want to have the option to do that. So I'm going to give myself, I think, 5 passes that I can use to either allow myself to take more time to finish or to put a book on pause and come back later. I'm trying to limit it to 5 so that I don't just pass on every single book instead of pushing through. I think it'll be good for me to actually just push through and finish most of these books or unhaul them and put them in my little free library. I don't want to loosen the rules so much that I make 0 progress. But again, I think it's important for me personally in general, but also currently in this moment, in this season of my life, to be kind to myself. So that is why the passes exist. As for the book selection, I'm going to use a digital wheel so I can put all the titles on it and easily add or remove things as needed. I just think it'll be the most simple way to go about it. And I did also want to note that I'm going to keep trying to read books from my physical TBR TBR outside of this challenge. So while my aim and my goal is to pick a book for my physical TBR every single week and either read it or get rid of it, I may also be reading books for my physical TBR for, other reading vlogs or for buddy reads or book clubs with my patrons, or just because I feel like it one day. So I'll also try to keep you updated every time I check back in to let you know if I've taken other books off my TBR by other means outside of this challenge. Like I mentioned, my plan is to do a real TikTok once a week where I let you know how the last week went and pick my next read to keep myself accountable in real time and keep y'all up to date with how things are going. But I don't want this to only be a series in short form content on social media. I do also want this to exist on my channel as long form content. So my plan is to also film my updates each week as I film my normal videos sitting here in long form, let myself talk a little bit longer about the books than I might for a short form video on social media. And once I get to the end of the month and I have 4 to 5 weeks worth of the challenge, I can compile those together and deliver it to you as more of a standard reading vlog that spans the entire month. That's my plan. I feel like that took me so long to explain, but this is the first video in this series, so I wanted to really let you know what to expect and what's coming. I'm feeling very galvanized and inspired and excited to work my way through my physical TBR, and I really want to capitalize on that feeling while I'm feeling it and not let it dissipate. So I'm jumping on it right away and I'm going to start now. So give me a moment. I'm going to set up my wheel. It is going to take, well, more than a moment to add all the titles, but then we can do our inaugural spin and pick the first book I'm going to read for this challenge. So, okay, the wheel is done. I think I just need to do it, even though I don't know why I'm feeling scared. It shouldn't be scary. Anyway, okay, let's just do it. Why am I so scared? Okay, it's fine. It's going. What did it? North and South? Seriously? What a way to start. Oh my God. I honestly can't believe that. North and South. Just land on a classic that is a lot of people's favorite classic of all time on my first spin, why don't ya? I'm gonna try to not take that personally, but I must admit I'm taking it a little personally, okay? I mean, I'm excited to read it. I've heard it's great. Well, we landed on North and South, starting this whole challenge on hard mode, I guess. I see how it is. I know exactly where it is, so let me grab it. It was in my little Penguin Classics section. I feel excited about this as much as I feel a bit challenged by this result, because I do tend to procrastinate reading classics just because I build them up in my head as being more challenging, more time consuming, more exhausting for some reason to read, when really they are not more challenging than other books to read often. And also, it's not like I read them significantly more closely or more critically than I do other books, because I read all books pretty closely and critically, to be honest, as you probably know if you watch my videos. So it's really not any different. I think I just build it up because I know that they are highly respected, that a lot of people love them, that there are, hordes of people who have written entire theses on these books. And for some reason that intimidates me. But anyways, I know a lot of people love North and South. I know it's a lot of people's favorite classic of all time, and it's one that I've been wanting to read for a while now. Anyways, I'm talking so much. I'm really excited, if you couldn't tell. So I'm gonna go start this, and I'll be back midweek to share my thoughts on the first half, hopefully, if I'm able to get to the first half in that many days. I think it's doable. We'll see. I'm reading so many books simultaneously right now. Not that that's anything new, but we'll figure it out. I'll get into the swing of things. And next week, we'll pick our next book. We're gonna make so much progress. I feel so good about this already. Hello. Hi, I'm halfway through North and South. I can't believe we're here. It's been about 6 days, so I'm cutting it close because I don't have a lot of time to finish this book if I want to stick to my 1 book per week goal, but I'm doing my best considering this is a long book and a little dense. But here we are. I had no idea what this book was about. Honestly, I'm glad I wasn't, because I think as much as I'm interested in the subject matter, I think if I had known what it was about before I started, I would have been more scared because this is at its core, at least so far, a book that is entirely about the Industrial Revolution and its impact on workers' rights, which, you know, is something I'm interested in, examining and picking apart the ideas that prop up capitalism, who deserves to make the decisions, who deserves to make a living wage from industry, and in this case, specifically manufacturing. Where are the ethical lines in terms of profit over health and safety and well-being of employees, whether unions and striking are ethical and moral, peaceful protest versus protests that lean into more of a riot, and scabs, you know, bringing in workers from outside to replace striking union members. There's a lot going on here, okay? And I wouldn't say it's the most dense classic I've ever read by any means, but there's a lot going on. There's a lot of ideas. And on top of that, this book is examining the literal north and south of it all and comparing a workers' town manufacturing new money for at least the owners of these factories to a southern way of life where it's all about the gentry. It's all about being good stock or having connections or having had a lord or a lady somewhere in your family line, even if you are not now currently wealthy, and differing perspectives on the classes and how they interact, and both wealth disparity but also class distinctions and that new money, old money idea. There's also a lot of commentary in here from our factory owner character about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and the idea that poverty is a moral failing in some way, that obviously if you're poor and not making this new money and being successful in this new industrial system, it's because you're not trying hard enough, you're obviously lazy or too focused on your own pleasure, which is a whole take. So yeah, you know, I'm liking it. I'm finding it interesting. I do love complaining about capitalism all day, so I'm on board. So far, I don't agree with anyone's take in this novel on any of these issues. You know, even in whichever debate is happening, there's usually one character who's closer to my belief system. But I would say that primarily these conversations are happening between Margaret, who is our protagonist, who is only 18. She might be 19 now, but she's a baby, okay? Especially in this time period. She knows nothing about manufacturing and how these businesses work based on her upbringing, and especially at the beginning of the novel, she has no interest in understanding it. She finds it very distasteful, the idea of new money and factories and manufacturing in general. She's not a big supporter of the Industrial Revolution, let's just say that. And at the beginning of the novel, she really is representing the South, and specifically representing the old money, pastoral estates, and so on sort of lifestyle and creed, and that is contrasted against this factory owner that she meets, Mr. Thornton, John, who owns a factory, is obviously a fan of the Industrial Revolution, is someone who has worked his way out of poverty and debt to be successful. He has more money than Margaret and her family, but he's not a gentleman, and he represents the North perspective in this case. And at the very beginning of the novel, I was not siding with Margaret because she had a lot of really judgmental, questionable views of working people and tradespeople that were hard to get behind. But now that she is becoming more and more familiar with a working town, a factory town, and meeting and making these connections with people who do work for a living, she is starting to have more of an understanding of how it works and also be compassionate for the plight of the workers and how hard it is for them to get by in this system. And generally, when they have these debates and conversations, I largely, or at least I more align with her perspective. But she is also very naive in her perspective. She still doesn't understand a lot of the intricacies of how it works. She's very young. This is all very new to her. And as much as she's approaching the issue with a lot more compassion, which I appreciate, and focusing on the humanity and personhood autonomy of the workers and their right to a livable wage and survival, she is in her own way pretty much just as paternalistic and condescending as Mr. Thornton is. His take is more blatantly evil, at least in what we've seen so far, and I find his takes incredibly off-putting, even disgusting at times. I'm not exaggerating. He says some gross things, but she is not necessarily better, again, in terms of the paternalism and the condescension. She seems to agree with him on some level that the poor, the less fortunate, are like children and they need protection and help, and they really need us to make sure that they're safe and taken care of, instead of looking at them as adults who are giving up their lives to work to make profit for the people who own the factories, but also risking their lives and their health because of the lack of health and safety regulations at the time, that they, as adults who are contributing and sacrificing as much, if not more, as the owners of these factories, deserve to make, again, a living wage. They deserve to be able to feed their children, clothe themselves, have a roof over their head, all the basics. Anyways, there's a lot going on here. I don't want to get too into the nitty-gritty about what the book is saying and all the different characters' perspectives, because I think you should just read the book if you're curious about that. There is also a bit of a coming-of-age growth story for Margaret, which is still, I would say, in its infancy. She has grown quite a bit from the very start of the novel, but she still has a long way to go. I must admit, I do find that she feels very young and naive, and I have found her to be quite irritating for most of the book so far. She's had her moments, but largely I'm finding her frustrating, so I am hoping in the second half she will continue to grow into her own and be a little bit less annoying to me personally. There are also hints that there's going to be a love story here. I don't want to say too much, especially about which characters are involved, but there are love interests, there are chances at love for Margaret in this book. And so far, I'm not super on board. I'm not shipping it, unfortunately. I think it's interesting. I find the dynamics interesting, but I'm not really a huge fan. I'm not rooting for any of these characters individually, really. So yeah, I'm not waiting with bated breath for a happy ending. But maybe, again, I'm only halfway through. Maybe there will be so much growth on everyone's parts that I'll be really excited for there to be some sort of happily ever after if we get one. I do think there are also some other things being said and explored, especially things to do with religion and sort of specific pockets of Christianity, different denominations of Christianity and their different perspectives on religion and different values, and just different people's perspectives in general, especially based on their background and their lived experiences and how religion fits into their lives. That is something that is less engaging to me personally as an atheist, I must say, but there have been a couple passages touching on religion that I have found interesting, at least in passing, if not deeply thought-provoking for me personally as someone who is not religious. I will also say it's not constant, it's not slapstick comedy, but there is a lot of humor in here, and there have been moments that have made me laugh out loud, especially moments that just kind of took me by surprise by being so dry and blunt and on the nose in a very funny way, in my personal opinion. So I do have a tab specifically for tracking funny moments, and there have been quite a few that just made me laugh in their silliness. There are quite a few characters. Most of the characters are really big personalities and quite over the top, which can make them grating at times, and I would say that is the case for most of them, that they can get very grating, but it also gives fun opportunities for drama and big blow-ups and silliness, so I do appreciate that. But it doesn't have as prominent a sense of that beautiful lyrical writing as some classics have, but it definitely has its moments, and there are some passages that are beautifully descriptive and evocative and lovely, and there have been a few quotes here and there that I felt really cut to the heart of things and were worded just in a really succinct yet profound way that I appreciated. But I wouldn't say that I'm overly blown away by the prose in general. It's fine. I do really dislike the way that the dialogue is written for the poor workers in Milton. It can be very opaque and difficult to read because it's trying to write the dialect into the text. I don't think it's meant to be making fun of them, but feels a little bit like it's making fun of them, which I don't love. It doesn't sit great for me. It just makes it harder to understand what they're saying and to really get to the heart of their arguments, to connect with them as people. It's sort of distancing and dehumanizing almost as a reader to have them othered in that way in the text. And presumably the people in the North and the people in the South in general all, have different accents, but the only people whose accents are written differently are the poor people in the North. And I don't love that personally. But yeah, that's it. I'm gonna stop because I imagine I'll have more to say when I get to the end and I don't want to ramble on forever. But like I said, I'll do a really short spoiler section to complain about the love interests. Okay, spoilers for the first half of North and South incoming right now. So I miss Henry, to be honest. He wasn't a perfect guy, okay? I think he was in love with the idea of Margaret more than actual Margaret. But I do think, they had a friendship. He did know her. I think he was a little distracted by her, queenly beauty, but he did like her for her, and they had things in common. And I think the fact that she was just shocked to be proposed to at 18 and wasn't ready and was sort of taken aback and afraid played into her refusal more than anything else. And now Henry is just gone. I assume he's just going to be gone for the rest of the text, to be honest, including Edith and everyone else from the start of the book. I kind of miss him because as much as he wasn't a perfect guy, he seemed genuinely thoughtful and kind. And, I don't really know what his focus is as a barrister, but maybe slightly more ethical than her current love interest, Mr. Thornton, who is running a factory where he is paying very low wages to his workers, trying to reduce their wages so that he doesn't have to cut into his own profits, and treating their struggles like a moral failing because he was able to pull himself up by his bootstraps. And he just keeps saying gross things that I disagree with on such a fundamental level that I actually feel my morals and values roiling with anger when he talks. And I assume that there's going to be some level of Margaret influencing his perspective and him gaining more compassion and actually talking to his workers and actually caring about their well-being, and that she will learn more as well. I don't know if she'll learn it from him, but hopefully from her connections to people like Bessie and Nicholas, to have less of a condescending, paternalistic sort of approach and see them as fully realized human beings who deserve to have a life, especially when they're giving up so much to work in these unsafe factories. So I imagine he will grow a lot and change, and that will be good for him, but I'm not sure I'll ever get over who he is at the start of the novel and some of the gross things he said already. I'm not a fan. And it's too bad because the first scene when he was introduced, I actually kind of liked him, and I liked the way that he sort of thought of Margaret and some of their little interactions. There was a lot of tension there and some interesting sparks flying in terms of their disagreements and opposites attract sort of thing. And I thought that, she was going to learn to be less bigoted about people from the North and new money through knowing him, which I think she is. But little did I know that he was going to be so off-putting that I would quickly close up shop for this ship and move on. I kind of hope someone else is introduced in the second half to be her love interest, or that she just keeps refusing him until the end and they don't end up together. I don't think that's likely, but I'm not a fan of John at this point, so we'll see what happens. I'm still not the most on board with Margaret either, to be fair. Like I said, she is very naive and young, and it shows, and she, has her things to work through, but she is slowly working through them. She's growing, she's becoming more resilient, she's a little less full of herself and snobby, so that's good. But yeah, the characters are a lot in this book so far, and I am struggling with the whole romance thing. I do think the actual tension between them is written really well. It's very engaging in the moment when they're stealing glances at each other or shaking hands for the first time and just being so hyper aware of touching each other's hands. But then as soon as the moment's over, I remember who the characters are and I just don't care anymore. So we'll see. But the themes are interesting. I like having an excuse to think about capitalism and workers' rights and unions this much. And also it's kind of depressing because things have not advanced as much as one might hope in the hundreds of years since this was written. But anyway, that's it for spoilers. And that's it for my thoughts on the first half of North and South. I'm going to go finish this, hopefully in a day, because that's how long I have before I need to pick my next book. So let's get to it. And I'll be back when I'm done. Well, hey, I finished North and South. Never thought this day would come. What a pick for our wheel to land on for my very first read for this Read It or Unhaul It challenge. I did wonder for a while there, in the middle, if I should just unhaul it and save myself all this effort because we'll get into it. I'll do a full review. I have thoughts, okay? Many thoughts. I have mixed feelings. Okay, you know what? I feel like almost any, with very few exceptions, but I feel like almost any book that the wheel lands on for this next spin will be easier to read in a week than this. So that is good. For full transparency, one of the only ways I was able to get through this book in a week, other than doing a simultaneous read of reading the physical book while listening to the audiobook, was that I took so many breaks. And when I took my breaks, I really tried to relax and unwind and focus my mind on something completely different. And that's where the sponsor of this video, June's Journey, comes in. If you've never heard of it, let me give you a little bit of a rundown on June's Journey. It's a hidden object mystery game set in the 1920s, and it's so beautifully animated and a really fun time because it combines different aspects, different types of gameplay all in one game. There are three main pillars of gameplay in June's Journey. You have the hidden object scenes that really challenge your skills of observation as you reveal the clues and progress in the storyline. Then you have decorating your island, which is all about creative expression and relaxation and really allows you to handcraft your own world for the game. And then last but not least, you have special events and seasonal content where you can either play with others or just enjoy having bonus challenges and pushing yourself to complete them in a time frame. The primary narrative of the game is that you're stepping into the shoes of June Parker, who is an amateur detective, and she is trying to figure out what really happened to her sister and her sister's husband. You progress through the story chapter by chapter through these beautifully designed scenes where you have to find hidden objects to find clues, and it's so fun. I've always loved hidden object games, even if I'm not the best at them. I still find them very fun. And there's something very relaxing and meditative about trying to find all the missing objects in a scene. I also love how sneaky they are about hiding things. There's always at least one that I just cannot figure out. And when I finally see it, I should have known. I wouldn't say that I'm particularly great at it naturally, but I do feel like it's a really fun challenge for me, and I'm always proud of myself when I get another star on a scene. I feel like June's Journey has the perfect combination of being challenging, but also being fun and relaxing. I think it's that combination of the hidden object scenes, which are quite a challenge and really push you to be fast and accurate in finding the clues, and you're motivated to get that next clue and push the plot line forward. But then you also have the relaxation and creativity of decorating your island, which is just a really nice break from the world and from reading more challenging literature, which for me is honestly a very close second for how much I enjoy it. There's just something so deeply relaxing about decorating my island and planning it out, making it beautiful. I love it so much. And as I was reading North and South, and when it was starting to get more dense or I was starting to get really frustrated with the characters, I was able to just put it down and open June's Journey and play a few chapters, find a few new clues, add a few decorations to my island, and I always came away feeling relaxed and refreshed and ready to dive back in. Honestly, the only drawback I can think of with June's Journey is that I wish I could play it more. It's really fun, and I'm really excited to see where the storyline goes and to finish decorating my beautiful island. I'll keep you updated. If June's Journey sounds as up your alley as it is for me, then you can download it for free with a link in my description box or by using this QR code. It's available for iPhone, Android, and PC. Thank you again to June's Journey for sponsoring this video and for making such a fun game. And with that, after a little bit of a respite, which June's Journey always provides me, it's time to talk about North and South. And I'm scared because so many people love this book, but I have qualms. Okay, enough dilly-dallying. I need to just talk about it now. I'm scared because I know so many people love this book, and I really do truly hate feeling like I'm letting y'all down by not enjoying a book that y'all love and that you told me I should read because you thought I would love it too. It's never personal, and I promise I go into these books hoping to love them as well. I'm just very picky. I have opinions. Kind of like Margaret Hale. I would say, to me, my interpretation of this book is that it's doing three different things. The first thing is that it's the story of Margaret Hale. It's a coming of age story for her. It is the transition for her from her childhood and her innocence into suffering loss, experiencing hardship, and growing into a woman and finding her own strength, independence, and passion and conviction as a person. It's also about her overcoming her ignorance and her prejudice, overcoming the way she was raised and class differences to understand the world in a more nuanced and compassionate way. So that's the first piece of the puzzle, and I do think that piece was done really well. I started off very much not a huge fan of Margaret Hale, and she grew on me by the end. She's not a perfect person. I did find her a little bit saintly and sanctimonious. We'll get into it in the spoiler section because I don't want to give anything too much away, but I find her one flaw that she's allowed to have, or acknowledged to be her one flaw by the author and the narrative, very funny and silly, to be honest. But she grew as a person. She did grow and change. She is a product of her times, but she was able to rise above it in a way that a lot of people didn't. And I respect that. I think she did a lot of self-reflection and growth. And even if she's not my favorite character of all time and not someone I would probably want to hang out with if she were real, I'm happy for her. She's still very young by the end of the book. I think she's approaching 21 at the end, if I got the timeline right. So she's still, got a long life to live, hopefully, and she'll keep growing and changing, I imagine. But I do think that piece of the puzzle was done well. The second piece of the puzzle here, the second story that's being told, is about the Industrial Revolution, about labor and new money, capitalism, manufacturing as an industry, what comes along with that in terms of workers' rights and unions, health and safety, and fair compensation, and everything else that comes with it. And that is the part of this book that I found the most intriguing, because I don't think I've ever read a book from this time period published in the mid-1800s that's really engaging with this subject matter. I have heard this book pithily referred to as a socialist's Pride and Prejudice, which I take issue with for a couple reasons, but I understand why people say it. There is something to be said for this book being so willing to engage with these ideas at a time when they were still in their infancy. And I found it very interesting to read about these ideas from this perspective, because of course, hundreds of years have gone by and our understanding of and rules and regulations around workers' rights have shifted pretty significantly, in some ways less than one would hope, considering how much time has passed. But it's a very different time, and it is in some ways a time capsule of the standards and beliefs of the time, which is very interesting. I do personally feel that after around the 60% mark, the book kind of drops this as a plot line. It does come back in the last couple chapters and is quickly wrapped up, but it's mostly ignored in the last part of the book, which I found to be very much to its detriment. I think that was the most engaging piece of this book to me personally. And it felt odd to me that it was so heavily focused on for the middle portion of the book and then just kind of dropped and ignored until the last second when things had to be wrapped up. So I found that frustrating. I felt when we moved away from talking about labor rights and unions, capitalism in general, when we stepped away from analyzing and critiquing that, this book became far less engaging and interesting to me. And I also, while understanding some of the reasons for it based on the context of how this was published and when, I do wish that Gaskell had had a little bit more of a perspective. I think in reading this, I often felt that she was just working as hard as she could to present both sides in as nuanced a way as she could and trying to give both sides the benefit of the doubt, which isn't necessarily inherently wrong, but I did feel like there was maybe a lack of incisive critique because there was a lack of perspective. It was so aggressively neutral that I didn't feel it had too much to say, and maybe it was revolutionary enough at the time to just present these ideas and to present both sides and to try to be nuanced about presenting both sides. Maybe that was a big enough deal in and of itself, and that's fair. But from a modern perspective in reading it, I do wish there had been a little bit, and just my personal preferences, I guess. I prefer when authors have a point of view about what they're exploring, and I wasn't sure that Gaskell really did have a point of view here, other than the fact that she clearly strongly believes that it would be to everyone's benefit for the employers and the employees to actually talk to each other, see each other as human, and try to engage in good faith, which I don't necessarily disagree with, but I do think we can take it further, which is why I take issue with calling this a socialist's Pride and Prejudice. I take issue with that, okay? This is not a socialist book. This is a friendly capitalist book. This is a book where we can make capitalism work by all holding hands and singing songs. Okay? That is not socialism. I'm so sorry. It's just not. I don't want to get too into the weeds on that because I'm also not an expert in economics, but it's not a socialist book, so don't get your hopes up, okay? I think that skewed my expectations a little bit for how radical this was actually going to be. Again, maybe radical for the time, still not socialist. I was a little bit disappointed in the end by how that whole pillar of the story was handled. The fact that it was just kind of dropped and then wrapped up very quickly in the last couple chapters in a very kumbaya, everything will work out if we just see each other as members of the human race. And there are definitely no other issues that still have to be ironed out as 9-year-old children are working in the factories and becoming terminally ill. Everything is great. Anyways, not super happy with how that was wrapped up, despite finding it interesting in the middle portion of the book. Like I said, it was my favorite aspect of the book. It was the most engaging aspect for me personally, and it just petered out and died a sad death in the last section of the book. The third pillar, and my least favorite personally, also the one that I felt was executed the most poorly, is the romance. Which is, again, where the socialist Pride and Prejudice comes in, because a lot of people have compared the romance here to the romance in Pride and Prejudice. They compare Margaret to Elizabeth, and they compare our male love interest, whose name I will not say for possible spoiler reasons. I'll talk about him in more detail in the spoiler section, but they compare our male love interest to Mr. Darcy. And I will say, I'm not a Darcy stan. I'm not Pride and Prejudice's biggest fan. I do like Pride and Prejudice. I like it a lot. I do like Elizabeth and Darcy, and I like their romance. This does not hold a candle to Pride and Prejudice in terms of romance. It just doesn't. And a big part of that is that the male love interest is absolutely the worst. In every possible way. I cannot stand him until, again, the last 2 chapters where he gets a personality transplant, but we don't get to see that happen. We're just told it's happened now, so we definitely should let go of everything he did before because now he's definitely much better. Cool. The male love interest is the worst. He is a whiny little baby for so much of this book. He's rejected by Margaret, and he decides that in response, he will give her the silent treatment for literal months. He will find every possible reason to be in her house, in her space, engaging with her family, but actively avoid looking in her direction or ever talking to her. And then he gets this, turned on is maybe the wrong word, but he gets this weird pleasure from making her suffer by forcing himself into her space and then ignoring her. Again, like a total child. He acts like a 13-year-old. She'll say something and he responds to what she said, but he'll direct it to someone else, like someone else is the one who said it, like her father or her mother, as if she's not in the room. Again, it's so immature. Could not stand it. Could not stand him. What in the world? And I've seen so many people list this as one of the greatest romances of all time. I am concerned for you. This is such a weirdly petty, obsessive kind of romance, and it's not even romantic. There is so little romance in this book. The vast majority of this book are these characters ignoring each other and hating each other and looking at each other with disdain or scorn, which, if that does it for you, I guess go off, but there's very little romance here. They have a little bit of an attraction when they first meet, sexual tension or a spark, and then it sort of dies for a while. And then there's one scene that's very dramatic where one protects the other, and that could be seen as maybe a bit romantic, but then that falls apart very quickly. And then there's just literally hundreds of pages of the male love interest being petty and whiny and jealous and weirdly vindictive and following her around and inserting himself into her life while trying to punish her by ignoring her and treating her rudely. And then in the end, they're happy and everything works out and they're gonna get married and they were in love this whole time, didn't you know? Very romantic. No, thank you. No, not for me. Comparing this romance to the romance in Pride and Prejudice feels honestly offensive to me. Okay, if you disagree, you can disagree. Different people find different things romantic. I really struggle to understand how anyone sees this as romantic, but I get that different strokes for different folks. If it works for you, I'm happy for you. I really, truly do not understand. I do not see the appeal of this man. I truly do not. And I'm really trying to take the time into consideration with, the fact that he's 30 and she's 18 when they meet, all of the weird sexist stuff he says, including, I'll quote for you. He says, I believe women are at the bottom of every plague in this world. That's our hero. Wonderful. He also calls our protagonist Margaret a beautiful creature, and Margaret's godfather is not having it. It was fantastic. He really took him to task. He goes on to say, beautiful creature indeed. Do you speak of her as you would of a horse or a dog? Yes, Mr. Bell. Yes. Snaps for Mr. Bell, because yes, thank you. There are so many moments for him that I just couldn't. I was not having it. I liked him in the start, actually. When they first met, I liked him better than her because she was still very much in her ignorant, condescending, holier-than-thou, hoity-toity, snobbish attitude, and he seemed like a regular dude who was just doing his thing, working a job. I eventually started to very much dislike him in terms of his beliefs when it comes to economics and believing that poor people are poor because they have some sort of moral failing, and if they couldn't pull themselves up by their bootstraps like he did, then that's their own fault, which I'm not sure he ever really grows out of that belief. We're not told that he does. He learns to see his workers as human beings, so that's nice. But I'm not sure he ever grows to think that maybe they're poor because of their circumstances and because life is not fair and is cruel and capitalism is not fair and is cruel, and not because they just somehow are less of a hard worker or less smart or industrious than he is. Margaret has experienced a loss and is grieving. And he goes to see her and sees that she seems to be holding up better than he expected, mostly because she's trying to hold it together because she has to, because there's a lot of pressure on her to hold it together. But anyways, and it says, Name would rather have heard that she was suffering the natural sorrow. In the first place, there was selfishness enough in him to have taken pleasure in the idea that his great love might come in to comfort and console her. Oh, good. He hopes that she's completely fallen apart so that he can swoop in and save the day, and she'll repay him by marrying him. Lovely. Also then compares her to an infant and he a mother, which is weird imagery. Much the same kind of strange, passionate pleasure which comes stinging through a mother's heart when her drooping infant nestles close to her and is dependent upon her for everything. Totally normal dynamics that he's hoping for there. I don't even want to get into how Oedipal his relationship is with his mother. We won't get into that right now, maybe ever. It's a whole other can of worms, but weird in that context as well. But this delicious vision of what might have been, in which, in spite of all Margaret's repulse, he would have indulged only a few days ago, was miserably disturbed by the recollection of what he had seen near the Outwood station. She was walking with her brother, but he didn't know it was her brother, so he thinks that she was with another man. And that is a stain upon her pure and exquisite maidenliness and has put him into an agony. He's a drama king. Although he hated Margaret at times, when he thought of that gentle, familiar attitude and all the attendant circumstances, he had a restless desire to renew her picture in his mind, a longing for the very atmosphere she breathed. Yeah, he's like weirdly obsessed with her and hates her, but also cannot stand to be away from her. But then whenever they're in the same room, he feels the need to punish her as much as possible. Let me find a quote from the time when he is actively ignoring her. Oh yeah, here. He never looked at her, and yet the careful avoidance of his eyes betokened that in some way he knew exactly where, if they fell by chance, they would rest on her. If she spoke, he gave no sign of attention, and yet his next speech to anyone else was modified by what she said. Sometimes there was an express answer to what she had remarked, but given to another person as though unsuggested by her. It was not the bad manners of ignorance, it was the willful bad manners arising from deep offense. The deep offense being that she said no when he asked her to marry him. And now he's acting like a literal preteen, giving her the silent treatment. And responding to what she says to other people in the room, like a baby. I just can't. It's so immature and gross. Then a paragraph later, he's remembering when she turned him down, but he resented those words bitterly. They rung in his ears, and he was proud of the sense of justice, which made him go on in every kindness he could offer to her parents. He's definitely showing up at her house every day with fruit and such, out of the kindness of his heart, and not out of punishing her for rejecting him. He exulted in the power he showed in compelling himself to face her whenever he could think of any action which might give her father or mother pleasure. Again, totally about pleasing her parents, definitely. He thought that he disliked seeing one who had mortified him so keenly, but he was mistaken. It was a stinging pleasure to be in the room with her and feel her presence. It's just, like, I'm sorry. To me, personally, maybe it's just me, I don't know. I don't find that romantic. I actually find that really weird and toxic and unhealthy and just immature. Why would you want to marry someone who acts like that? It's so sad. He's such a child. Anyways, so yeah, that's the third pillar of this story, the romance, which for me, definitely the worst part of this book by far. Did not like the male love interest whatsoever, which is sad because the way he was introduced, there was a little something. There was a little bit of tension between them. It started off well, very quickly fell apart when we learned his beliefs to do with industry, and then he just became a huge asshole. Until the very end, where suddenly he has a change of heart that we very much do not see on page, that we are told very, very rapidly has happened, mostly because a turn of fate has changed his life, and I guess that forced him to have empathy for people, because he suddenly knew what it was like to not have only luck in his life, I guess. In part, I think if we were gonna go through this whole journey, we needed a little bit more time, even just a couple more chapters. He shows up again in the last 2 to 3 chapters, and they are very short. I'm talking a couple of pages after hundreds of pages and over a year, I believe, in the time of the novel of them being apart. We needed way more time with him to see this slow transition, to see him grow and change as a person. We needed more details of that, but we also needed to see it happen with our own eyes instead of being told it very quickly in a summary. I needed more time of them being back together and having that passion rekindled and realizing they had both changed and grown as people and coming back to each other. It was just so fast and rushed and abrupt, very unsatisfying for me. I'm not sure I ever would have been a huge fan of the love story, considering the characterization of this male love interest. He would have had to be a different person for me to be a fan. But I think I could have gotten on board with it, especially in the context of the time, if we'd at least been shown that development instead of just being told it happened and rushing through it at the end like that. I also kind of feel bad for the other guy who was clearly in the story just to be a, red herring or a foil. And I felt sad for him. I felt like he was a much more likable person and just a normal guy, and poor dude. I realize it's a product of its time, but I didn't love that the only female character who got to be a fully fleshed out, complex, and at all likable character, depending on your perspective, was Margaret. Every other female character felt like they existed in the story to contrast Margaret. Either they were more traditionally pretty than her, but not nearly as queenly and exquisite in her unique beauty, or they were frivolous and silly and stupid and vain, to contrast how practical and smart and saintly and self-sacrificing Margaret was. Or they were oddly obsessed with the most apocalyptic book of the Bible and very morbid. There's some weird stuff to me about how the narrative handles one character in particular and seemingly portraying her as being weak for giving in to her terminal illness, which I don't think she really had a choice about. But again, trying to sort of contrast her more defeatist, morbid attitude with Margaret, who is able to push through anything, even though she does not have a terminal illness. So the fact that she continues to live is not a sign of her moral superiority or internal strength. But anyway, I just felt like every female character existed to make Margaret look better. There was a lot of misogyny in the book. Again, I get it. It was written in the 1800s. What do I expect? But it wasn't particularly fun to watch every single female character be treated so poorly and characterized in such a silly, stereotypical way. And Margaret herself, while she gets the chance to be more flawed and complex, I say flawed. She's not really allowed to be too flawed, but anyways, the narrative doesn't see her as flawed. We get to see how flawed she truly is. She is also, the perfect epitome of a good woman. She does everything that's asked of her. She's self-sacrificing, she's religious, and she tries to be a good person, and she does charity, and she gives up everything to be a good daughter to her parents, and on and on and on and on. She's just the perfect, practical and thoughtful woman who doesn't care about silks and hats. It was just a bit tiresome. Also, either Gaskell or just this book has a thing against the Irish, so keep that in mind. Very unkind to the Irish. I think I'm going to leave it there for my spoiler-free thoughts. I've mostly said what I wanted to say, but I will do a quick spoiler section for those who have read this. So spoilers for North and South, starting now. Yeah, Mr. Thornton, John, being our love interest, not a fan. Do not like that man. Get a job. I know he has a job. Stay away from her. I don't understand the appeal. He is being added to the Hall of Fame of classic leading men who I cannot stand and do not understand why so many women are throwing themselves at their fictional feet. Mr. Rochester, Heathcliff, Mr. Thornton, what in the world? What is the appeal? I do not understand. Are the straight women okay? I don't get it. Anyways, no, it's a no for me. I do not like him. No, thank you. And he, like I said, he kind of started off interesting and he ended in a spot where I thought, okay, I could see why Margaret would want to marry him in his current state. But he went through such a dip of such immature and petty and completely unappealing behavior for so many hundreds of pages, and then just popped up at the end, totally transformed out of nowhere. It did not work for me personally in terms of an arc or character development, and I spent so much time absolutely pulling my hair out reading about him that I just did not care by the end, and I wanted Margaret to choose to be by herself. I either wanted her to choose Henry, who seemed like a nice chap, and liked her even when she was poor, and clearly actually loved her and liked spending time with her, and they have things in common, and has held a candle for her all these years. Either choose Henry or just live independently. You now are fabulously wealthy because it's a book, and you could do whatever you want. Why not go live in Spain with your brother and sister-in-law and drink wine and sit on the beach? Why tie yourself to this mediocre man? I do not understand. Anyway, I don't get it. I really don't get it. I feel that he really felt so entitled to her affection and was very personally offended that she did not want to be with him. Like I said, there is also some weird, a little bit of an Oedipus complex with John's mom. She is also a terrible character. Anyways, I think I'm going to end the spoiler section there, and I think I'm going to end my review there because I've been talking for an hour and I feel like I'm just getting worked up and I don't know that I have anything new to say. I think I've kind of covered all the bases. I'm pretty disappointed in this in the end. I did like the writing style. There were some highlights in the prose that I quite enjoyed. I also loved Mr. Bell. Unfortunately, he was introduced very close to the end, but he was a lovely character and he and Margaret had some amazing interactions that I really appreciated. I think there were some character moments that were really lovely here. I didn't dislike reading this in general, but I did feel that the way the romance was handled really dragged it down for me. And then just dropping the whole workers' rights union plotline and examination at about 60% of the way through, and then just not touching on it for a very long time before suddenly fixing it all with good vibes and good intentions at the end was not what I expected and quite disappointing. And just the ending in general was so rushed, so abrupt. Not at all what I expected, especially after how languid the pace was for most of the book. I didn't hate this. There are things about it I appreciated, but definitely not a new favorite. I have a lot of points of contention with this one, as is obvious by this rant I just went on, and I could go on, but I won't, for everyone's sake. I think right now I'm sitting around 3 stars. Yeah, I feel pretty good about 3 stars. It was very middle of the road for me in terms of the classics I've read. I don't know how I feel about reading more Gaskell after this. I feel like I want to give her another chance, but this was definitely disappointing for me personally. And yeah, just that ending, the way it wrapped up. What an unsatisfying way to wrap it up. I did find the last literal 2 to 3 lines funny, and I will say that there were quite a few moments that made me laugh and that were kind of silly and funny throughout, but that wasn't enough to make up for how abrupt and sudden and rushed the ending was. Just kind of baffling, to be honest. I think that means it's time to move on and spin the wheel once again to see what I'm going to read next. I am mildly terrified after this experience, but like I said, things can only go up from here, right? Any other book I read has to be easier to get through, right? I think so. Let's do it. Let's get it out of the way. Rip the Band-Aid off. Okay, so as you saw, the wheel landed on The City of Mist by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This is a short story collection addendum to his Cemetery of Forgotten Books, that's it, quartet. I did some research though, because there is one more full-length novel in the quartet that I haven't read yet, and I wasn't sure if this was meant to be read after the 4 main books in the series. The internet seems mixed. Opinions are all over the place. It seems like at some point Carlos Ruiz Zafón himself said that the books could be read in any order, but I'm not sure if that's applicable to this collection because I don't think it was out at the time that he started saying that. According to readers online, there are some people who said they read this before they finished the main series and that it was fine, but they wished they'd waited and read it at the end. And I really don't want to spoil myself on this series. I really like this series. 2 out of the 3 books I've read so far are 5-star reads. The 3rd one was 4 stars. It's a really fun series that I like a lot. So I don't want to mess it up in the last bit of the race. I don't know where this metaphor is going. So I'm going to cheat a bit, I guess, because I'm not going to read the book that the wheel landed on, but I am still reading a book from the series. I'm just reading the next book in the series based on where I am. Instead of The City of Mist, I'm going to read The Labyrinth of Spirits. And don't think that I'm cheating to make this easier on myself, because The City of Mist is a cute little baby collection of short stories that would probably take me an hour and a half to read, and instead I'm reading this monster, which is almost 800 pages long, because I have a problem. Why am I like this? Feel free to psychoanalyze me in the comments. Anyways, I'm gonna read this instead. I am actually very excited for it. I'm a little scared about how long it is and trying to get through it in a week, but I love this series. I've loved it so far. I have hope that I will continue to love it. And I am really excited to read this. So wish me luck. Feel free to question amongst yourselves why I'm like this. But yeah, this is going to be yet another challenging week of this challenge. I guess it's aptly named. My prediction and my hope is that this is going to be a 5-star read. And I'm excited for that. So wish me luck. Why did I start this again? Oh my God. Okay. Yeah, we're doing it. It's fine. I'm fine. We're fine. Also, just a note for full transparency, before I spun the wheel, I did add 7 new titles to it because I did a little shopping before I even started this series, and the package came in the mail about an hour after I filmed the first the first installment. So to be transparent, I have added 7 books to my physical TBR, and I added them all to the wheel. Okay, so
Hey friends, I'm back outside because it's a lovely, sunny, warm summer day and because I'm halfway through The Labyrinth of Spirits. This monster of a book, it took me almost the entire week to get halfway through, but things are really picking up now, and also I'm totally focused on it, so I should be able to finish it before the deadline, but I'm cutting it very close. But as far as an update and letting you know what I'm thinking so far, I'm not going to talk for too long because I have a feeling not only is this a very long book and has a lot going on in and of itself, but it's also the final book in a 4-book series that has raised so many questions and answered very few. So I have a feeling we're going to be getting a lot of twists and turns and answers, hopefully, in the second half of this book. So I feel like the main thing I can say at this point is that I'm enjoying it so far. I really love Carlos Ruiz Zafón's writing style. It's both luscious and rich and descriptive and so evocative of the time and place. This sort of mid-century Barcelona setting is just scrumptious. It's very film noir. I feel like that's the term I keep using every time I talk about the series, but it's very apt. And I just love his writing style. It is both lush and descriptive and scrumptious and lovely, but it's also funny and colloquial and fast-paced with lots of banter that feels very natural. Another thing I love about Carlos Ruiz Zafón, at least in the series, it's the only work of his that I've read, his characters are so vivid, they really jump off the page, and I just love them. You can't help but love them. Even the very, very, very flawed characters, of which there are many, it's hard not to love them. You know, Fermin, he's got his issues, okay, but I love him. You know, just that's how I feel about all of them, other than the very obvious villains who are very obviously villainous, but even them, to be honest, they're not cartoonishly villainous. They still are so well developed, and they still have their moments where I feel bad for them somehow, some way. And I just love that. I feel like his stories and this series are definitely a labyrinth of ideas and characters and hidden meanings and false identities, and there's so much going on. It's so mysterious, but it's also fun and adventurous and fast-paced, and I'm just having a really good time. I've really enjoyed the series. I'm so glad I started reading it. I feel like this is going to become a comfort series for me that I'll reread many times, and kind of similar to another comfort series, a very fresh and new comfort series to my collection, the Locked Tomb series by Tamsin Muir. I have a feeling that on each subsequent, I have an inkling that on each subsequent reread, the series is going to have so much more to uncover, to reveal. There are so many layers, and I enjoy that. It feels like an intellectual puzzle that I love peeling back. And just like the Locked Tomb series, it's not just that, it's also amazing characters, lots of heart, really sweet familial relationships and friendships, you know, some interesting thematic content, and lots of really funny, quippy banter that feels very natural and not forced or overdone. And I love that. So I'm having a great time. I'm excited to finish this. I'm glad that I decided to read this one this week, even though the Wheel told me to read the short story collection. I think it was the right call. And I'm also shocked that Carlos Ruiz Zafón said that these books could be read in any order, because so much of this book spoils things that happen in the earlier books, which makes sense because it's later in the series, but if you read this book first, I feel like those other books just wouldn't land the same. So it's odd to me. Anyway, I'm enjoying it. I'm excited to finish it, and I think the last thing I'm going to do before I go off and do that is share some of my theories with you in the spoiler section, because again, I feel like that's kind of all I can do at this point, but I do have some theories. So let's talk spoilers for the first half of The Labyrinth of the Spirits, and I guess technically also the 3 other books in the series, though I'm not sure how much I'll actually say that pertains to them, but just to be safe, the other 3 books too. Spoilers starting now. Spoilers. Okay. So, my theories. First of all, we just got the life story rundown of Victor Mataiix, the author of The Labyrinth of the Spirits within this world, and it was very interesting. I started to second guess myself because it's been years since I read the first book, and I've read this series in a pretty spread out way, I guess, with the exception of the 3rd book in this one, which I read within a couple months of each other. For the most part, this series has been a very long-term project, so I was concerned that we had met or heard of Mataiix before and I'd just forgotten about him. No, I don't think he's ever been mentioned before. I looked it up, and my understanding is this book is the first time he shows up. So I feel a little bit better about my memory. But learning about his story and learning that his daughters were taken away, I have a theory that his daughters were taken because this powerful man's wife kind of fell in love with them and thought they were such gorgeous children, and thought that it was kind of unfair because she was very classist in her sort of internal monologue in this meeting with Mateix and his wife, that it was unfair for a lower class, like commoner, not too far from being impoverished couple to have such gorgeous daughters. And perhaps she felt that she would make a better mother. So I have a feeling that the daughters were taken because she decided she wanted to have at least one of them as a daughter, especially because there's that weird moment where she asks one of the daughters to tell her whether she thinks that her own mother or this other random woman is more beautiful, which is strange. So that's my theory. And I think she either already immediately knew that she only wanted one of them, or decided splitting them up was a better idea to kind of help force them to forget their past and sort of separate them from their past, or she decided it was too much work to have two, decided she just wanted one of those, and gave the other daughter away. And my theory is that Mercedes, Val's daughter, and only daughter, is the other daughter, and they're long lost sisters and don't know it. That's my theory, especially because we heard the story from Mercedes that a woman was watching her at school and approached her one day and begged her not to forget her. It felt very much like a long-lost mother who was, forced by some powerful person to give up her rights to her daughter, trying to contact her daughter again. And everything that went down with the way that she was murdered in front of Mercedes, and then her father told her never to speak of it and told her that this woman was just mentally unwell and had done this to so many girls, and, Mercedes wasn't special, and she could just forget about her. My spidey senses were tingling in that scene. I immediately thought that that woman was her real mother, and now that we've learned more about what happened to Mateix and his wife, my theory is that that was Susanna and that Mercedes is one of her daughters. I don't know if I have a good theory for who has kidnapped Val's. Clearly it's someone. I feel like the obvious answer is that it's Martin, and that would sort of tie things together really well, especially because we haven't seen Martin since the Angels game, and he clearly is still alive, at least in my opinion. He has good reason, very good reason, to be angry at Val's, and whoever is keeping Val's prisoner clearly absolutely despises him with their entire being, because the way they're treating them is inhumane, even though Val's is clearly a horrible person. One of the worst people, if not the worst person that we know in this series. Still, the way he's being treated is horrific, and I am feeling bad for him because it's so inhumane and terrible. So I feel like it has to be someone who has such a personal vendetta against him, which is either Martin or Mateix, if he's still somehow alive, or the two of them pairing up together, perhaps. So that's kind of my theory. I feel like that's maybe a little obvious, which is why I don't feel as confident. I mean, I guess the daughters thing is kind of obvious too. So yeah, those are my theories. Do I have other theories? Not theories, I guess, but wishes for what I hope will happen before the end of the series, other than wanting all the questions to be answered, because I'm curious. I really hope that Alicia and Fermin have at least one conversation, one moment together, that Fermin learns that she didn't die for his own, well-being, and sort of reducing the guilt he felt. Obviously, she's had a really hard, difficult life, so he might still feel guilty about that, and maybe he should. I don't know. It's not fully his fault. He did his best in the moment, but I hope for that, and I hope that Alicia and Fermin can connect, because Fermin is so good at becoming like an adopted big brother, uncle sort of figure, and I feel like Alicia needs that really badly. She really needs stable love in her life, but I think, she could get a job working at the bookshop, become friends with Bia, have Fermin as an adopted uncle, and find, a more peaceful life with more stability and love. I would love that for her. I think Alicia is a really interesting character. I also really hope that she ends up with a woman, maybe Mercedes. I don't know how big their age gap is. I feel like Alicia is around mid-20s, and I guess Mercedes is about 17, so maybe that's too much. I mean, once Mercedes is an adult, obviously. But I feel like there keep being scenes where Alicia is either stroking another woman's cheek, or fantasizing about kissing them, or lingering glances. And I would love for our badass femme fatale character to be sapphic in some way. that would make my heart happy. It would be cool if Cahax came back for a moment, if he is still alive, just a little cameo. I don't think I want him to be as deeply involved as some of the other characters. I feel like if all three of the disappeared writers were in on it together and sort of working as a team, it would feel a little cheesy, so I kind of hope that that doesn't happen, but I'd love a little wink wink nudge nudge implication that Cahax is still wandering the cobbled streets of Barcelona at midnight in the fog under the lamplight, you know? That would be very tonally appropriate, I think. So anyways, I could probably go on forever. I've already gone on for a while. I'm going to stop. Those are my theories and hopes for the end of this book and series. Wish me luck. I'm going to go finish this, and I'll be back when I am done to give you my final review. I'm excited. Okay, bye.
Hello friends, I have finished The Labyrinth of the Spirits. I used so many tabs, oh my god. I feel like a lot of tabs, it's either a sign that I have a lot of criticisms that I had to keep track of, or that I was loving the book so much that there were so many things that I wanted to be able to remember. And this is the latter, which I am very happy to say. Not that I expected to dislike it because I've loved every other book in this series so far. Yes, I have a few qualms here and there. I feel like I wouldn't be me if I didn't. I really loved this, and I think I'm gonna go for 5 stars again. I think this is a series where it's 3 5 stars and a 4 star, which is pretty amazing. I'm really excited to read the short story collection now that I've read the full series. It's gonna be really fun, but I really, really liked this. This was really good. I think that Zafon did an amazing job of bringing everything together. There are so many characters, there are so many mysteries, there were so many threads that were started, so many storylines that were started through the other 3 books. And the fact that this, for me anyway, really satisfyingly tied everything up and connected things and and gave us satisfying endings for all of these many, many characters and just really brought it all together. I think that is an incredible feat. I'm really impressed, and I not only enjoyed this as the ending of a series, but also enjoyed this in and of itself as not a standalone, but as a book. On its own. Up to this point, I was saying The Angel's Game was my favorite in this series by just a smidge. And now I'm conflicted because I really loved this, and I really loved Alicia, especially, who is a new character that we meet in this book. She's a badass, and I really, really liked her as a character, and I loved how much of this book was following her, and she was our main protagonist. We still got to check in with some of our past protagonists, like Danielle and Fermine, who, less so Danielle at this point. I think I liked him more as a teenager than as a grown man, but we'll get into it. But I love Fermine for all his faults, and he has many. Well, mostly one main fault, which is that he loves to objectify women as much as humanly possible, but he does it mostly in a very loving way. You know, it's still objectification and it still irks me, but it doesn't feel mean-spirited or malicious. It very much feels like he just is a man who is attracted to women and is really attracted to women and really loves women, which, you know, fine, especially considering the time period this is set in. I think that makes sense. And Fermine is such an amazing character in every other possible way. He is so funny. He's very intelligent. He's very quick in his responses. He's also very loyal and kind and caring and brave and self-sacrificing. And I just love him as a character. He's really quite insightful as well. And I feel like Fermine, I don't know for sure, but I get the impression that he is sort of the stand-in for Zafon himself. It feels like Fermine gets to say everything that the author wants to tell the audience, tell his readers more directly. And I don't know, I just, despite his flaws, I love Fermine and I would want to be his friend. Danielle, again, we'll get to it. But Alicia as a protagonist in this book was amazing. I loved her. I loved her story. I loved that we got much more time and depth with a female character, because that was one of my main issues with this series as a whole, is that it was not only very overtly and blatantly objectifying women at every turn from many, many characters, a lot of misogyny and sexism, both systemically, but also on an individual character by character basis, but also that we just got so few female characters who were allowed the time and space to breathe and be fully fleshed out characters. We had a few here and there, but they were always the supporting characters. And I think Isabelle was the closest we got to a fully fleshed out female character up to this point, at least again from what I remember. And I really liked Isabelle, but I feel like Alicia really takes the cake for me as my favorite female character, and she was just amazing. So anyway, I will say there is violence in all of these books, and all of them have moments where they get darker than you might expect, especially because while I wouldn't say the tone in general is comedic all the time, there is a levity, there is a comic quality. There is a lot of use of comedy for commentary's sake, not only from Fermine as a character, but just in general. I wouldn't say the tone of the writing itself is super comedic. It is quite, as I've described the series before, a noir, atmospheric, eerie, and dark and mysterious kind of feeling, and it's quite lyrical in its descriptions. It's very evocative. So it does have a bit more of a serious literary tone in a lot of the narration style, I would say, but then the characters really bring in so much comedy and levity. So then I feel like when there are those moments of extreme violence, they kind of take you by surprise because they can be so intense and so graphic, kind of out of nowhere, it feels. And again, I think the other books have that as well. From what I remember, they all have at least a little bit of that. But I think that maybe this book takes the cake with the graphic violence. There were a couple scenes in this book that were a lot that just, you know, and I read a good amount of horror, not extreme horror, but I read horror. I read books with blood and gore and body horror and all kinds of things. And there were still moments in reading this that I was cringing and had to take breaks and felt a bit nauseous. There were some intense moments. It never feels so overdone that it feels like it's just for shock value or sort of an exploitative kind of framing. It always feels like it's serving the story, even when it is a bit shocking. I really can't say anything about the plot because it's going to give away too many things. I am honestly shocked that Carlos Ruiz Zafón said that you can read these books in any order. Please don't read them in any order. I would highly recommend reading them either in publication order or possibly reading The Angel's Game, since it's a prequel, first, and then reading the other three in publication order. But I would still read them in publication order. I think that makes the most sense. I think each book reveals things about previous books that would take away a tiny bit of the magic and the surprise and the intrigue from earlier books if you knew them ahead of time. Obviously, there's a lot to remember, so you maybe would forget some of the details and they would still land just fine for you. But especially this fourth book answers so many questions. Basically, all the questions of the series are answered in this book. So if you read this first, I feel like the rest of the series would not be nearly as mysterious and intriguing. So please don't read this book first. Please don't. But I had a really good time with it. I found it really interesting. It was very adventurous and exciting, despite being almost 800 pages or 700 pages. What is it? Yeah, no, 800 pages. It's quite fast paced and exciting. It has very driving, consistent forward motion to it. And as I think I said in the midway update, Zafon had this knack for creating really vivid characters that jump off the page. And that really helps, at least for me as a character-driven reader, to keep pushing through because I care about the characters. I'm invested in them. I'm invested in their relationships, whether platonic or romantic. I'm invested in their fate and I want to know more about them and I want to spend time with them. And so I think that is really the heart of the series. Although I'm sure another huge draw for a lot of people, and for me too, is all of the different threads, all the different mysteries sort of intertwining and interconnecting, a labyrinth, if you will, and it all coming together in a really satisfying way in the end, at least again for me. So can't say too much in a non-spoiler way about what actually happens in this book, but highly recommend this series in general. I've had a lot of fun with it and I'll definitely reread it at some point. Not sure when, because I have a huge TBR, but someday I will reread it for sure. And the end of this book had me sobbing like a baby. Not in a bad way, but I was very touched emotionally. So yeah, great. Loved this. 5 stars. So happy that I read it and read it now. I think this was a good time for me to read it. It was a challenge to finish it in a week with all the other reading I had to do, but I managed it just in the nick of time. So I'm really happy about that. Spoilers for the Labyrinth of the Spirits and by extension, this entire series starting now. Don't watch this if you don't want spoilers. Okay, so I was right about the daughters. I think I got them mixed up because I forgot how old they were, but I was right that the girls were essentially stolen and sold to wealthy families, and the woman who tried to talk to Mercedes and was killed in front of her was her mother, which is devastating. I was really glad that in the end the two of them were reunited, but it was heartbreaking that they were reunited only to immediately take their own lives together. I can understand. I think so much of this series in general, deals a lot with trauma and the lasting effects of trauma, and this book touches on it quite a bit. The girls had been through so much in their lives and were likely feeling like they didn't have much of a future, although I do think they could have had one. They could have carved one out for themselves, and I wish that had been the ending just because I wanted that for them and I wanted them to find their peace and their joy far away from the evil people who stole their lives from them and stole their family. But I can understand how they would feel that they were finally together and they wanted to be able to rest finally after a difficult life. But it's quite heartbreaking. I also was so upset. I understand, okay, I think it makes sense for the story, but I am so upset that Vargas, the policeman who was working with Alicia, was murdered. And so suddenly, when it happened, I was like, he's definitely gonna pull through, right? Like, characters get mortal wounds all the time in this series and manage to pull through. There's no way he's just dead now. And then he was just dead. I was so upset. I really liked him as a character. I really liked the growing bond between him and Alicia. I felt like they had a really great dynamic, and I was very upset that he was just murdered so suddenly. I was glad that Alicia was able to murder his murderer in a very, intense, graphic way. She was also given several mortal wounds that she managed to pull through on, which is good, but I was very upset about Vargas. I really liked him. So, anyways... I get it, but I was upset. But I mean, to be honest, I'm pretty much upset every time a character in these books dies because, again, I feel like even the characters who are more evil, well, no, I wasn't upset when his murderer died, when Alicia killed him, Rivero. I wasn't upset when he was murdered because he was a creep, like very creepy. But even like Mercedes' mother, I'm not sure how much she really understood where Mercedes came from because she was already ill when she and Val's married, and it doesn't seem like they ever had any kind of a real marriage or real relationship, so I'm not sure he even would have ever told her where this baby came from. So I'm not sure, I don't know how complicit she is in what happened to Mercedes, but I felt terrible for the way that her life ended, especially because it seemed like she was begging to be allowed to die for a long time, and she was suffering so much, and Val's was just keeping her alive as she was suffering for so long, and then she was just abandoned in the house without any of her medication or the machines that were keeping her alive, and she was just slowly withering away. Horrible. I was sad when Juan died. We have Carax dying at the end of this book. That also broke me and made me really sad. I even felt sad when Leandro was killed, when Alicia killed him, because I felt like that was honestly one of the few threads that I felt wasn't fully wrapped up, and I think I felt conflicted about, obviously he was a terrible person for so many reasons. Yeah, and in so many ways, but he seemed to genuinely care about Alicia, and I was sort of lost about that final interaction and him baiting her into killing him and what the intention behind that was. I do think it was maybe meant to be just one final manipulation from him and sort of tying himself to Alicia forever, where she could never forget him or never forget that she took his life, and they would sort of always be tied together. But why did he want to die? We didn't get enough insight into him as a character. And again, he was a terrible person, but I found myself feeling sad, mostly for Alicia, but in that moment, I felt sad that he was gone because I wanted them to be able to have more of a fully open and honest conversation, and for Alicia to get a little bit more closure and to understand him more as a character, because I didn't like him, but I found him very interesting and very intriguing, and I wanted a touch more from him in terms of his motivations. But maybe that's, maybe it's more realistic that you wouldn't get that, especially from a character who is so manipulative. He, even if they had a conversation like that, there would be no way to know if he was being truthful, because he was obviously a masterful liar. Yeah, that moment kind of got to me. But I think the one that really shocked me the most was Val's, because honestly, Val's is such a horrible human being, and he's so villainous through this whole series, and there are so many reasons to hate him as a character. Even throughout this whole book, he gives many reasons to hate him. And yet, I felt so sorry for him, because the way he was treated while he was being held captive was so inhumane to such an extreme degree that I couldn't help but feel for him. Yes, he deserved to be imprisoned for what he did, definitely. Maybe he deserved to die for what he did. He did kill people, so okay. But the way he was treated was so horrific that I started feeling so terrible for him. And so by the time we get to the end and he finally dies, I felt sad for him, even though in some ways it felt like a poetic way to wrap up his story and very appropriate that he would die in this way, sort of as an unknown in a mass grave, unmarked and unremarked, with no one to grieve him or care, considering he did the same thing to so many people who didn't deserve it. And the scene of him taking his own hand to stop the infection is one of the grossest scenes I've read in a while, and I just couldn't help but feel really bad for him. Which is wild, because he's such a bad person. He's such a bad character. Not badly written, but he's a terrible person. So that was kind of wild. And again, I just feel like that shows how skilled Zafon was at writing his characters, because as much as I hated him, I still felt for him, and he still felt like a real person. So yeah, that was a lot. What else? Did I talk about any other theories? I think I said that I thought Leandro was sort of behind some of what was happening, and that ended up being true. I think I said that was part of my theory. I can't remember. He was basically in charge of Val's being kidnapped, and he was working with the policeman who replaces Alicia and Valgas when they're taking off the case, and he was part of this whole ring to steal children and sell them, and I was working with Val's on that and decided to get rid of him. I believe we also figured out that he was originally taken by Ubak's adopted daughter, who was the older of the two girls stolen from Mathais and his wife, that she and her husband kidnapped him. But I'm not sure how much of the torture happened under them and when it transitioned over, when Leandro found out about it and it sort of became a corrupt police matter. Those details are a bit muddy, or maybe I just missed where we found out for sure when that sort of handover happened in the timeline for Val's and what was being done to him. We also, oh my god, I was just looking at my notes, we get the reveal in this book that Isabelle and David Martin went off together for 3 weeks, I think, right before she gets married to Juan Sempere, and they sleep together. She gets pregnant, and Daniel is David Martin's son. I think we had that sort of telegraphed at various points, or we thought that could maybe be a possibility. And I feel so bad for Juan Sempere because he deserved better, and I'm so sad for him that he was so dedicated to Isabel and she never loved him like that, really. Like, she loved him as a person, as a friend, but she didn't love him the way he loved her, and that breaks my heart because he was loyal to her to the very end and was such a lovely, sweet man. But also, poor Danielle learning all of this as an adult, which does not excuse the shit that Danielle gets up to in this book, because not only is he being a terrible husband to Beatrice on so many levels, but for some reason, honestly, I think my biggest qualm with this book, like, I know I already mentioned that there is a lot of objectification of women, and it does irk me. And the way that sex is handled in these books is very, I don't know why it has to be included, to be honest, but the way it's written about just sort of, it's not my thing. But my biggest issue with this book as a whole is that there is a scene of Daniel being upset for fair reasons, but taking it out on his wife, who had nothing to do with any of the things he's upset about and is going through a lot, dealing with a lot with him. And from the way it's written, it seems like he her, which is... like, what? As I was reading it, I just thought, this can't actually be happening. What? Why? What? And then it's never addressed. Later, they, sleep together again more tenderly. And I guess that's an apology. I could not. What in the world? Why? I almost brought my rating down a star because of that, because what the fuck? What the fuck? And it did, I must admit, it did kind of ruin Danielle's character for me. He was already not one of my favorites, and I was already on the fence with him for a variety of reasons. But wow, horrific. And I don't know, I've seen some debate about this, and I'd be curious what your thoughts are if you've read this series, or I guess read other books by Sappho, because I've only read this series. But do you think that the misogyny and the objectification of women is a reflection of the author and his view of women, or do you think it was his attempt to write realistic male characters living in the 1930s through to the 60s, 70s? I guess it's like the early 80s at the very end, but that it jumps ahead quite a bit. Mostly taking place in the 30s, 40s, 50s. Do you think he was just trying to accurately write male characters in that time period and trying to depict their view of women accurately? Or do you think that it's a reflection of his own maybe blind spots when it comes to women? I don't know the answer myself, but that scene in particular, considering Danielle is supposed to be one of our heroes, I do think he was sort of being twisted by his own grief and trauma, but it wasn't explored in enough depth and wasn't condemned enough by the narrative for me to really feel like that was an intentional critique, or at least not explored in the way that I would personally prefer. I found that very upsetting. And again, if anything were to bring down my rating of this book, it would be that scene that was basically 2 paragraphs, because what? I think this book overall is good enough that I'm still sitting at 5 stars even with that scene, but I'm not gonna lie, it kind of ruined my opinion of Daniel forever. And I wonder, I don't really know how I'll feel about him if I ever reread the first book, because he's the protagonist there. He is a teen, but yikes. Yeah, I would be interested in hearing your thoughts if you've read the series and where you land on that, but that scene was messed up. Anyway, I feel like I've been talking for a while, so I'm gonna stop. That's it for spoilers. And final things I want to say: love the writing of this series, love all the different intertwining stories and characters, and I love the descriptive, evocative language and the really strong sense of place and the eerie, mysterious film noir atmosphere. And I also really love the commentary that runs through these books. There's so much commentary on this period of time in Spanish history and the government and the regime and how it impacted regular everyday people. And this book in particular, one of its biggest through lines and sort of the main mystery has to do with the way that the regime treated everyday people who were seen to be of less value. And I just think there's a lot of really sharp, incisive, fascinating commentary through this series in general. And I can't say that I am particularly well versed in Spanish history in general or Spanish history in this time period, but I feel that reading the series has really piqued my interest and made me want to read more and learn more about this time in history and the Civil War, etc., etc. So I really like that as well. These books do have a lot to say commentary. And not only social commentary, but also a lot to say about the power of books, the power of stories, and about writing, and about family and loyalty and love and connection, grief and loss. There's a lot going on in these books. Trauma, and how trauma can give you scars that you heal and get even stronger from, or they can sort of slowly rot you from the inside out. I really, really enjoyed this series. Like I said, have some qualms, mostly with the depiction of women through the series and the way that sex is talked about and handled. And as I mentioned in the spoiler section, there's one particular scene that's a couple paragraphs long near the end of this book that I don't think had to happen and kind of ruined a character for me. And I almost lowered my rating of the book based on that scene solely because I was so upset about it. I don't think it doesn't feel like it's enough to lower my rating to a 4-star, but it was close. I really debated. But this book is very heavy, even though it's a paperback. So I'm going to wrap up my thoughts on this, and I'm going to wrap up this video in general. The Labyrinth of Spirits and North and South, not too bad of a start to my Read It or Unhaul It challenge. This first vlog is just going to be these 2 books since I started the challenge mid-month in July because I got excited and didn't want to wait. But future videos will be monthly, so probably 4 to 5 books included per video, depending on how, the month works out, how many weeks are in that month. But I think this was a really good start. 3 stars for North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell, and 5 stars for The Labyrinth of the Spirits by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I had fun reading both of these, even if I had my criticisms, and I hope you enjoyed this too. I hope you're enjoying the short form weekly updates. If you're not already following me on Instagram and or TikTok, do so. The links are in the description box, and you can follow along week by week and see what I'm spinning and what books I'm reading. But I also hope you're going to enjoy these long form YouTube updates where I get to, talk a little bit longer and share more of my in-depth thoughts about all of these books. I'm excited for this challenge to continue, even if it is a little stressful sometimes. I'm hoping I'll start landing on some shorter, easier, quicker reads for a while, but we'll see what happens. Thank you again to June's Journey for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to use this QR code or click the link in my description box to download June's Journey today. You can play on iOS, Android, or PC. It is so much fun. Seriously, join me. I'm having a great time. My island is looking amazing. But I've been talking long enough. I'm gonna get going. Thank you so much for watching this video. Like it if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.